feel for you, Cleveland. Right now, joining me to talk about this breaking news story out of Cleveland are my colleagues Mike Garafolo and Tom Pelissero. And Tom, what is the latest out of Cleveland?
Well, Will, 5 total positive tests for COVID-19 today with the Browns. That includes their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, as well as 2 players, one of which is Pro Bowl left guard Joel Bitonio, the other wide receiver, Kaderil Hodge. All 5 who tested positive today out for Sunday night's playoff game against the Steelers. Now, that game, I am told, is still on as scheduled. The Browns, of course, had a series of positive tests really over the past couple of weeks here, but the NFL's medical experts, upon their contact tracing and genomic sequencing, determined that these were likely the result of community spread, not an outbreak within the facility. Well, now, with 5 positive tests today, even after no positive tests on Sunday or on Monday, obviously there's another process that has to take place here in terms of the contact tracing, additional testing to try to figure out whether or not they do have a broader issue now, an outbreak within the facility. That process remains ongoing.
That's right, Tom. And that'll be the key.
The plays here, Mike G.
Yep. Yeah, you're seeing it right there. Kevin Stefanski looking at his play chart. He has been the play caller for the Cleveland Browns, so that's going to be disrupted. It will be offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt. I went back because I remember that there was a play calling storyline with them in the offseason and into training camp. I said, I got to refresh myself on this. And I said, Alex Van Pelt play calling. And it was right after he had gotten hired. It was back in February, and the headline was, Alex Van Pelt, I can call plays if needed for the Browns. It was something to that effect. Well, there we go. You're needed, and it's going to be you calling these plays on Saturday. And what the Browns did, because Kevin Stefanski was trying some different things, and I bet he's glad he did now, is he allowed Van Pelt to call some plays during training camp practices. He was supposed to call plays during the preseason as well, but as we all know, there was no preseason because of COVID. So at least he got a little bit of exercise in the summer. And look, he's the offensive coordinator, so he's intimately involved in game planning and what's happening during the week. So it's not like you're calling in a complete stranger. It's not like the Lions a couple of weeks ago when they had a former research guy come in and all of a sudden he's calling plays for the first time because they lost a couple of coaches. So I guess that's the one bit of solace here. Van Pelt is highly thought of as an offensive mind. We'll see what he can do on short notice as far as play calling in just a huge game for the franchise. We're sorry, Browns. We are really sorry, Browns. This doesn't feel right. You finally make the playoffs, and then something like this happens.
Don't like it at all. I know there's Browns fans out there thinking the football gods are conspiring against them. Tom, I have to ask you, how do they prepare for a game Sunday against their rivals, the Steelers?
Well, Will, the Browns are severely shorthanded in terms of their coaching staff because they still have some coaches who had positive tests last week and missed last week's game against the Steelers, who are still not yet available, though some of them potentially could be cleared here. The acting head coach is going to be Mike Prefer, who's the former Vikings special teams coordinator, longtime special teams coach within the league. He actually filled in for Mike Zimmer for a game against the Cowboys several years ago when Zimmer underwent eye surgeries. It ended up being a pretty competitive game. I know that Prefer at the time was pleased with the fact that he was able to at least show what he could do in a head coaching role. Well, much higher stakes now in a playoff game, the first playoff game in 18 years for the Browns. Obviously, Prefer's not going to take over the play calling duties, as Mike said. That will fall to Alex Van Pelt. But in terms of the overall game management, which is something Prefer has been involved in, both in Minnesota, where he worked with Stefanski, as well as now in Cleveland, that is going to fall on Mike Prefer's plate. And let's also not overlook this. We're still talking about the possibility that there are additional positive tests here coming up in the coming days. Doesn't mean there necessarily will be. Again, the NFL and its medical experts going through the normal contact tracing process. That involves looking at the data from the tracking devices that everybody wears. It's conducting interviews. It is going through that genomic sequencing that determined that last week with those positive tests for the Browns, there were actually 3 different strains of the COVID-19 virus that had impacted the Browns. That shows that it was believed to be a subject of community spread. Cuyahoga County with one of the highest positivity rates in the country 5 positive tests, though, on one day certainly raised concerns that they may have something going on within the facility. That's the process the league and specifically its medical experts are going through now to make sure there's not further issues. For now, the Browns facility remains closed. They were unlikely to practice today anyway. Tomorrow will be a key day to see whether or not there are additional positive tests and whether the Browns are permitted to get back on the field.
And just to be crystal clear here, the one thing that would disrupt the game would be the virus spreading amongst the players and amongst the coaches. When we've seen that this year, it's been because that is the issue. They don't want to put players in close proximity if they don't have to, the league that is, to make sure that they are safe. I mean, it's not because of competitive balance. If there's a competitive balance issue and they feel like everyone contracted the virus from the outside and then brought it in, that won't stop the game. That won't disrupt the game. The NFL doesn't care about that. Regular season or the playoffs, they don't care. The only thing that will disrupt it is if they feel it'll be spread amongst the players and coaches. That's something we continue to emphasize because I think a lot of folks have missed that along the way. So we just want to be crystal clear about that. Now, on top of this, they lost Olivier Vernon, the Browns did, their pass rusher, to an Achilles injury the other day. They are hopeful that they're going to get Denzel Ward, their stud cornerback, for this game, though Kevin Stefanski wouldn't speculate on that when he spoke to the media. I believe it was yesterday. So we shall see about his status. But that would be a tiny sliver of good news here if you get him back for this game against the Steelers. But just a world of issues right now for the Browns to have to overcome. It does sound like medically there are no major concerns here. So I guess that's another silver lining, obviously, for Cleveland on this one.
In terms of people feeling good, Kevin Stefanski specifically, I'm told, feels good in terms of physically. Obviously, he's sick over not being able to coach in this playoff game, but Stefanski at this point does feel good. And just adding to one thing that Mike pointed out in terms of the exposures here, Kaderil Hodge, who's one of the 2 Browns players who tested positive today, was one of those players who was designated a high-risk close contact 2 weeks ago before the Week 16 game after being exposed to linebacker B.J. Goodson, who had tested positive. The NFL has high-risk close contact protocol. You're isolated for 5 days thereafter. That's where they have found, based on the data about the virus, that you are most likely to eventually test positive. And there have been over 30 cases among NFL players and personnel this season where people who have gone to that high-risk close contact protocol have eventually flipped positive. Well, we got to a point, we got outside of that 5-day window. Hodge was able to come back. We do not know whether this is in any way related, but if there are any other Browns players now who were designated, who are going to be designated high-risk close contacts with any of these coaches or players who tested positive today, that exposure most likely would have come at least yesterday on Monday. 5 days means that any close contacts would have the opportunity, if they test negative, to get back to that game Sunday against the Steelers.
All right, Mike, so my follow-up to you is this, because there are fans wondering, the NBA did a bubble concept, a bubble atmosphere, and I think there's some fans wondering, what about the possibility of the NFL doing so, given what we're already seeing? And it's Tuesday of a week that is going to see some great football on the weekend.
Yeah, that's been something that they've been resistant to, both the players and the league, is even when they were talking about the possibility of